La Escuela de Economía, Administración y Negocios y la Facultad de Administración de Empresas. Es un inmenso placer presentarles a ustedes hoy al profesor Henry Mintzberg, que ha sido pues el mentor, digamos, de nuestro aprendizaje en estas áreas. Profesor Henry Mintzberg, hello. Y para iniciar, quiero que el padre Julio Jairo Ceballos Sepúlveda, nuestro querido rector, nos dé un saludo a esto que es un hito para la escuela y para la universidad, tener al profesor Mintzberg con nosotros. Padre Julio.
Bien, muy buenas tardes. Welcome, Professor Henry Mintzberg. I am Julio Jairo Ceballos Sepúlveda, President, Universidad Pontificia Bolivariana en Medellín. Como dice el decano Jorge Alberto, es un gran honor para nuestra universidad y también para nuestra Escuela de Economía, Administración y Negocios tener esta clase maestra con una persona reconocida internacionalmente por sus aportes para la administración y para la práctica gerencial. Ha sido profesor de la Universidad de McGill en Canadá y ha tenido una prolija obra que ha sido soporte en la enseñanza en las escuelas de negocios. Por esta razón, pues, hemos querido invitarlo desde nuestra Escuela de Economía, Administración y Negocios para tener esta clase maestra que seguramente va a ser muy bien aprovechada por los docentes y por los estudiantes y por todo el público en general que se ha conectado en este momento para seguir sus enseñanzas. Así pues que para todos ustedes y de antemano mis felicitaciones para la escuela por esta importante clase y por esta persona tan interesante que nos acompaña hoy para impartir sus enseñanzas. De nuevo, pues mi reconocimiento y mi saludo al profesor Henry Mintzberg. Welcome to University, Profesor Henry.
Bueno, muchísimas gracias, Padre Julio. Y con ustedes, pues, está Juan Alejandro Cortés Marín, nuestro director de la Facultad de Administración, quien va a empezar con este conversatorio, con esta clase maestra. Y Juan, muchísimas gracias, digamos, por todos tus buenos oficios para hacer posible que el profesor Mintzberg esté con nosotros. Adelante, Juan.
Muchas gracias, decano. Muchas gracias al rector general, padre Julio Jairo, al profesor Henry Mintzberg. Nuevamente, muchas gracias por estar con nosotros, por habernos brindado este espacio, profesor. Hace unos días, cuando tuve la posibilidad de conversar con usted, quedamos gratamente impresionados por su generosidad en ofrecernos este espacio para dirigirnos no solamente a la comunidad académica de la Universidad Pontificia Bolivariana, sino también a la comunidad académica del país. Incluso yo estoy siguiendo el chat en YouTube y veo que hay personas de Argentina también que se están reportando.
Sí, claro.
Y por lo tanto,
¿Sabes cuándo vamos a empezar?
pues, lógicamente agradecemos mucho esta clase maestra. Bueno, el profesor Henry Mintzberg no necesita mucha presentación. Quienes estamos en el ámbito académico, empresarial, conocemos de su obra. El profesor es profesor de estudios gerenciales en la Universidad de McGill, en Canadá. Ha tenido más de 20 grados honoríficos en universidades del mundo. La Orden de Montreal, la Orden de Canadá también, oficial de la Orden Nacional de Quebec. Y También ha obtenido premios por sus libros, como el premio George R. Terry de la Academy of Management por el libro El auge y el declive de la planeación estratégica, y recientemente ha obtenido los premios a liderazgo y gerencia humanística por el Humanistic Management Network de la Academy of Management también, y el premio a los logros de toda una vida en gerencia, el Management Lifetime Achievement Award, otorgado por Thinkers 50 en 2015. Entonces, profesor Henry Mintzberg, de nuevo, muchas gracias por aceptar esta invitación a nuestra universidad. Quisiera comenzar esta conversación con usted hablando un poco sobre gerencia y contexto. Y uno de los temas que usted ha venido trabajando en los últimos años es el reequilibrio de la sociedad. Los recientes acontecimientos en distintas esferas de la vida económica, política y social en Colombia, además de los efectos de la pandemia en el mundo, han profundizado problemas y han generado mayor polarización y división que hacen difícil para las organizaciones públicas y privadas avanzar hacia su sostenibilidad. En este panorama, ¿cómo puede una sociedad buscar ese equilibrio? ¿Y qué papel juegan las organizaciones en esa solución?
Sí, es posible conseguir un poco de agua, que el aire me resecó la garganta.
Juan, I'm getting no translation.
Yo no estoy escuchando la traducción.
I'm not getting any translation, so
Yeah, Henry, this is because I'm not like having the Spanish speakers so far, and so it seems okay. This is why, but yeah, if okay, at some point it will happen. I assume that. Mm-hmm.
Okay, good, no problem.
Good.
Okay. Do you have translation right now, Professor?
I'm hearing you.
Yo te escucho.
Okay.
Pero
voy entonces.
Yo no.
Voy a hacer de nuevo la pregunta, ¿ok?
Ustedes tienen cómo
Entonces,
monitorear.
Comenzaba diciendo que uno de los temas que ha venido trabajando en los últimos años es el del reequilibrio de la sociedad.
No es muy buena. Cuando él habla se escucha saturado, pero no es por la ganancia del volumen, sino por...
Can you hear me, Professor?
Yeah, I hear you. I hear you perfectly. I hear everything, but I'm not sure. Do you want me to speak? I assume you're going to ask some questions.
Yep. Do you have the translation on?
I don't know where to put it on. I hear you because you're speaking English, obviously, but I don't know where the switch is to put on translation. I'm not sure there is.
Don't worry about it. Don't worry. I can do it. I can do it in English, and then the translator can do it into Spanish. Is that okay?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. So I was asking you that the first thing I like to ask is about one concept that you have been working in the later years about rebalancing society, and that recent things that have happened.
We are going to have a closed loop communication. We are not open to the full like floor of the event, so we gotta wait. But they have set up already. Everything it's ready to start, and they already are in the greetings and intro of the event. So I'm waiting for an input signal. So I'll start translating from Spanish into English. Okay. Now
okay, but
me estoy escuchando yo. Me estoy escuchando yo mismo. Y así no. Mira, aquí tengo el audio. Hola. I'm sorry, but I'm listening. No me puedo escuchar a mí mismo. Okay. Sorry, but I have my voice in my headsets, so I have to remove my headset and see what happened, because they tried to do something and they spoiled the sound.
I wonder if we could go the other way. It would be clearer for me if you asked the questions in English and they translated you.
I think that's possible. Yes, sure.
That's easier because then I can understand your questions a lot better than through
yo podría entender las preguntas mejor.
I know. So I'm going to ask the question in English, and the translator will do the translation from English into Spanish. Is that okay?
Yeah. Yes. And one other question.
Okay.
Is it simultaneous translation, or should I stop every once in a while so the translator could translate?
It's simultaneous, so you can talk all you want, and the translator will do the translation immediately. Okay. So the first thing I want to ask is about the concept of rebalancing society that you have worked in one of your latest books. And I was asking you that the different things that have happened in the economic, political, and social spheres, not only in Colombia, but in other countries, besides the effect of the pandemic in the world, has deepened the problems, generating more polarization and division that makes hard for organizations, either public or private, to move forward into sustainability. So having that as a background, how can society look for that balance, and what role do organizations play in looking for a solution?
Okay.
Bien.
I would say, first of all, that I'm not sure the pandemic made it
Yo no sé
work.
que la pandemia hiciera que eso funcionara.
Can the Spanish be blocked for me, maybe? So,
¿Podríamos bloquear el sonido? Porque de otra manera no.
in other words, do I have to hear the Spanish, or is there a way to stop it for me? I don't know. If not, I'll just talk. Or I could turn down the volume, maybe, so I don't hear it too strongly. So maybe when I'm talking, I'll
De manera que cuando, yeah, it's a good idea.
Yeah. Okay. So
Yeah.
from the, I think the first
Yo
comment
creo
was the
que el
effect.
primer comentario fue sobre el efecto.
Yeah, I should say some words about rebalancing.
Voy a decir el tema de reequilibrar, el reequilibrio de la estrategia, sí, de la gerencia, digamos, de la administración. Lo que se asume en 1991, de alguna manera después de la caída del muro de Berlín, donde el capitalismo, se dice, venció al comunismo, se creó un desbalance con respecto al poder estatal que hizo que colapsara el sistema comunista. Y se habla del triunfo del capitalismo. Puedo hablar de lo que ocurrió en Canadá, mi propio país, o de lo que pasó en Estados Unidos. Vemos que los sectores pluralistas y de las organizaciones, los sectores privados y las industrias. Pero debido a esa brecha de entendimiento, hubo un desbalance del crecimiento del poder de uno de los lados de la balanza. Y se hizo muy crítico. Algunos países como Canadá se salieron completamente, lograron llegar a un punto de equilibrio más rápido, pero en Estados Unidos no se logró llegar a esto fácilmente. Y con respecto a la pregunta, bien, durante la pandemia, eso se ha exacerbado o se ha hecho peor. Eso está funcionando muy mal. Y bueno, pero yo creo que digamos que las personas mayores,
Erdogan in Turkey,
con el señor de Erdogan en Turquía y otros líderes ocurrieron antes de que ocurriera la pandemia. Tuvieron que rebalancearse, buscar un punto de equilibrio, países como Alemania y otros países de la Unión Europea. Estamos hablando de Irán, Brasil y otras naciones que tuvieron ese tipo de desbalance. Una sociedad saludable tiene más equilibrio. Digamos, durante la pandemia, las empresas tenían que suministrar a su gente la tecnología, los equipos para poder seguir funcionando. Y eso ocurrió en Canadá, en Alemania, en países escandinavos también. Si lo contrario también ocurre, de la manera tradicional. Aquí hay, Henry, I'm sorry, but every time I'm speaking, we have a my
Sorry.
Okay, Professor, can you hear me now?
I can hear you now. I closed the microphone.
Yo cerré el micrófono
while I'm talking, I closed
y es mientras estoy hablando cierro el sonido, pero
so I can't,
yo no puedo.
While I'm talking, because I have to close this down. But when I finish, I put it back on. Okay.
Cuando termino, yo lo puedo volver a colocar. No hay problema con eso. The point here is that when you're speaking and I'm translating, my voice is interfering with the sound, so I cannot hear the full answer. So I translate like 50%. So we are trying to address this issue now, because otherwise we are going to miss 50% of your insights. It would be a pain. So, right. So it would be, a pity. So we are trying to address this right away. Okay. Those are technical issues, but we are doing our best to keep on track. Sorry for that, Henry.
Can I do anything on my end, or am I opening and closing the mic?
The point
that's okay.
Yeah, the point is that if you use headsets, maybe the situation is going to improve. If you have headsets available, we can try and see what happens.
Yeah, I've never.
Lo que vamos a hacer es que
since we have simultaneous
Sí, vamos a hacer algo atendiendo lo que nos dicen mucho en el chat, y es que vamos a ir sin traducción, solo en inglés. La traducción la montamos más adelante, de tal manera que puedan acceder a esta charla las personas que nos están viendo por YouTube, y para aprovechar lógicamente el tiempo con el profesor. Entonces, seguimos con el profesor Henry. Professor Henry, Professor Henry, can you hear me? Yeah.
Is that?
Can you hear me? Yes. What we are going to do is that we are going with no translation, because it's interfering with the people that is watching us. So what we're going to do is to have our conversation in English. Is that okay? And then later we can translate the recording. So the people that cannot speak Spanish, English can watch it with the translation, but later. Is that okay with you?
Whatever works is fine. Do you want me to keep the headsets on?
Yeah, if you can hear me well like that, it's okay. If you can hear me well without the headset, it's okay. You don't need to turn out the audio. Yeah, that's okay. Okay, so we're going to continue with this conversation. So without the translation, attending some suggestions by the people on the chat. So for those who doesn't speak English, they are going to have this conversation translated later, so they can have the same possibility of listening and learning from this conversation. So, Professor, one of the questions I have from this unbalanced society we have is, what is the role that organizations have in the whole situation? Because as you mentioned in one of your books, we live in a world, in a society of organizations. So we need an organization from the time we arrive in this world, and we need an organization to have our funeral services. So from the cradle to the tomb, we need an organization. And in this unbalanced society, what is the role that our organizations play in order to look for a better society?
Yeah, I mean, you're correct in quoting me that we live in a world of organizations. We're born in hospitals, we're buried by funeral homes, and everything that happens in between: entertainment, education, work, play. So much is happening in organizations. On the other hand, organizations have purposes, and they're established. And so the purpose of a business organization is to produce products and services efficiently. And the purpose of a government organization is to provide us with public services and correct things that go wrong in the society. So on one hand, let's take business. On one hand, business is critical in its behavior, in the sense that it has to act responsibly. If business doesn't act responsibly, we're in trouble. But when business, part of the problem with imbalance is that business has become too powerful in many countries, especially the United States and Britain. When I go to Brazil and I say to my Brazilian friends, which country is more corrupt, Brazil or the United States? And they laugh. And then I say, I'll give you a hint, it's not Brazil. And why do I say that? Because the corruption in Brazil is criminal. And they were dealing with it. Whether they're still doing it, I don't know. But they were dealing with it. The corruption in the United States is legal. The Supreme Court of the United States legalized bribery in the sense that it opened the floodgates to political donations. And now the whole Congress is bought off by pharmaceutical companies and gun lobbies and so on and so forth. So the situation is much worse in the United States because they can't deal with it. The Americans think that you fix the problem by fixing capitalism. And they propose, I have 8 examples, I think, caring capitalism, progressive capitalism, democratic capitalism, sustainable capitalism. We need to fix capitalism, but fixing capitalism will not fix society. We need to fix capitalism in the sense that we have to change the whole way money is invested and the way businesses are pressured to produce short-term gains and so on. But we need to fix the balance. We need to fix society. Business will not fix society. It can simply do the opposite by lobbying not to have changes. So we need business to be responsible for that. We need government to take the steps to drive things, but government is so constrained that it can't do it. And Franklin Delano Roosevelt, as president, said something very interesting when a activist, a black activist, asked him to support a cause, and he said, "I agree, I want to do it, go out and make me do it." And the make me do it explains how you're going to get change. Change is going to come from what I call the plural sector, the non-business, non-government sector, the activist organizations, the social movements, the social initiatives, the NGOs, non-government organizations. They're the ones that have to drive the change, not the established organizations. And let me add that the model for major social change that I see in the world historically has been the Reformation in Germany in the 16th century. And that happened because Luther, who was a nobody, he was a monk who posted some ideas on the wall of a church. But because of the social medium of the time, the printing press, his ideas went viral the way we talk about viral today. And that's how that major change came about. In other words, it came from the ground, and it came with people who are fed up with the corruption.
Thank you, Professor Mintzberg. And when you're talking about business and what business role in society of producing products and services, but also the other organizations that has nothing to do with business, but still they have to be managed. It takes me to the next question, and it is about something that we teach in business schools to any kind of organization, and it's about strategy. That is one of your topics that we can see in many of your papers and in books like The Rise and Fall of Strategic Planning and Strategic Safari or Strategy Bites Back. So what we can understand of your approach to a strategy is that this is not a process, linear or a methodic one that we have understood for many years in a traditional way. So for those that have been, like me, educated in a business school, we have been taught that strategy is something that deliberate you put into a plan in order to achieve in a timeline, but understanding your approach, this is very different of what the real strategy is about. So we are living in a hyper-connected society and with so many changes that we are looking around in our environment. What are the key elements that an organization, a manager, should have into account in order to define an organizational strategy?
You know, in a way, my answer is very similar to the previous one, but within the organization. And that is, strategy doesn't necessarily come from the top. Strategy doesn't necessarily come from the chief executive and the leadership. Or when it does, that leadership is on the ground. So entrepreneurs are famous for being very much in touch with their businesses. They're on the ground, they're speaking to customers, they're speaking to workers, they're shopping in their stores, they're walking in their factories, they're in touch with what's going on. But in larger organizations, strategy often also comes from the ground. And I'll give you a perfect example. IKEA used to be, which sells furniture, changed the furniture business, and sells furniture prepackaged, saving you money and so on. And there was a brilliant idea. And in their own website, they say that this idea didn't come from an executive committee meeting, didn't come from the entrepreneur, didn't come from the top. It came because a worker tried to put a table in his car and it didn't fit. And so he had to take the legs off. And then came the critical strategic moment. And this is what strategy is about. That moment was when somebody, the worker or somebody else, said, wait a minute, if we have to take the legs off, so do our customers. And that didn't come from any top. Now, that idea had to get to the people who could change the company, and they were open to that idea. And so you had a free flow of information in that company that enabled that idea to get through. I call this emergent strategy, and I argue that strategy is not a planning process, it's a learning process. You learn the strategy, and you learn it through customers and products and interactions and things that happen in real life in the organization. That's where strategy comes from. And I think the interesting strategies, either they come that way or they come from people at the top who get off the top and get on the ground and see for themselves what needs to be done.
Professor, one of the things that have called my attention in your latest book is a concept that for the first time I read, and I want you to explain it a little bit more. And it is about bottom management, because we have been, used to listen to top management and middle management, but for the first time in your book, I read bottom management. So can you explain us a little bit more about what this concept is about?
Yeah. Well, I use it as a metaphor to show how silly the concept of top management is, because everybody talks about top management, but what is top management on top of? They're usually on top of the building, if it's a big, tall building. They're on top of the pay scale. They earn the most money. But there's an expression in English and maybe in Spanish too, to be on top of things. And that means to be in touch, to know what's going on. And if you see yourself on top, if you literally see yourself up there somewhere looking down on everybody else, then how can you be on top of what's going on in the organization? So top management is a metaphor, and it's a destructive metaphor. Okay, then we have middle management. And my point is we never, ever say bottom management. If we say top management, why don't we say bottom management? After all, they know they're at the bottom. And my point is no company should have the right to use the term top management if it doesn't use the term bottom management. So I'm not promoting the use of the term bottom management. I'm promoting getting rid of the terms top and bottom management. We could talk about central management. We could talk about connecting management. Instead of middle management, we could talk about connecting management. And for bottom management, we could talk about engaged management or operational management or something like that. So instead of top, middle, bottom, we could have central, connecting, and engaged management. But as I said a moment ago, all managers, including chief executives, have to be on the bottom. They have to be on the ground. Nothing happens on top except meetings and talk.
That's what it reminds me of another concept in your book, Managing, that may have caused some kind of a scandal. That it said something like, we need less leaders and more managers, meaning that managers should avoid looking for a delusive image of a leader, but engage more with action in their organizations. And every time when I teach that, from those that are not used to your work, they scandal, because in their organizations from many years they have listened that they have to be leaders, but as you point out in your book in Managing, that leadership or the image of a leader is probably something that comes with an image of a superhuman, unachievable, but that organizations, what they need right now is managers that engage into action. Did I understand good that idea?
Yeah. Perfectly. I would add something, which is, of course, we need leaders. We need people who take the lead and have ideas, and of course, we need that. But leaders who don't manage don't know what's going on. Managers who don't lead are very discouraging. So we need leaders who manage, and we need managers who lead. In other words, we can't separate that. It's become very fashionable to say that leaders are more important than managers. Big, big mistake. Absolutely not. Managers have to lead and leaders have to manage. They have to be the same people. The same person has to do both. And I put leadership as a role of managers. So managers have to lead in the sense of encouraging people and building or strengthening culture and encouraging groups and building groups and all those wonderful things that they have to do. But if you try and lead without managing, you don't know what's going on. You're disconnected. It's when you roll up your sleeves and get down on the ground and find out what's happening, the managing side of it, that's critically important.
Well, that's a good message for our managers and of course for our students. I want to talk about another concept which I really like, and that my MBA students, they work on a lot. They have to apply your model of organizational structure, and that's the topic, because in my point of view, I think that designing of the organizational structure is one of those topics that probably they are less taught in business schools, because probably it's more attractive to teach about strategy or teach about organizational culture. But I think that organizational structure design is one of the biggest topics and one of the main skills that a manager should have in order to adapt his or her organization into what the changes of the environment is about. So we have learned from your work structure in fives. Has this model changed in the latest years? Can we still design organizational structure in fives?
I agree with everything you said. Absolutely. There's a joke that an economist is somebody who never met a real person, but once had one described to him or her. And we could say that a business school student is somebody who never heard anything about organizations, but is expected to go out and manage them. How can you manage organizations if you don't understand organizations, and yet we don't teach it? It's shocking. We hardly teach management seriously, and we don't teach organizations. We have to understand them. The title, my book that you referred to, Structure in Fives, I'm now revising here in this house, and I'm calling it Structure in Sevens. But the main title is Understanding Organizations Finally. We have to understand organizations. We have to understand what they're about and how they work. Otherwise, how can we manage them? Even chief executives, if you've spent your life in a professional organization like a hospital, and suddenly you have to run a restaurant chain, or vice versa, even worse, how can you do that if you don't understand the difference? So in the book now, I'm building it around 4 basic forms of organizations. And I call them programmed, professional, project, and personal. It's similar to the other book, but I've got new names. So programmed is the organization runs like a machine. Everything is programmed, like McDonald's, hamburgers. Professional would be things like hospitals, universities, engineering firms, not necessarily engineering firms, but accounting firms and so on, where people work largely individually, not so much in teams. Law offices. Project organizations are where the experts work in teams, like advertising agencies, film companies, research labs, and so on. And personal organizations are entrepreneurial. One person does it all. or does most of it, and it's centered around an individual. Those are very, very, very different species of organizations, and don't think that you can take the knowledge from one and run the other, because you have to understand the differences. Let me illustrate with sports, because it works so nicely. The classic programmed organization is American football. Everything is programmed. Every division of labor is so sharp. You've got a quarterback on the field who calls the plays. Everything is programmed. You call the play and everybody does what they're supposed to do. Baseball is professional. It's almost everybody for themselves. The pitcher pitches, the catcher catches, the batter hits, the outfielders catch, and it's, you know, baseball's the perfect sport for the coronavirus because everybody keeps their distance. It's really quite amusing when you think about it, compared to rugby where they're all in a huddle, you know, in a scrum. A project organization, I use hockey because we're big hockey fans in Canada, ice hockey, but soccer, football is an example, basketball is an example. The interesting thing about all those sports is that when the ball or the puck is in one end and the offensive team is taking it out, it's like a new project. It's like the beginning of a new project, and it's all teamwork, and nobody knows what's going to happen. In football, the offensive team knows exactly what's supposed to happen. In hockey or soccer, football, nobody knows how it's going to happen. Otherwise, they would be stopped. So they've got to take their opportunities. So it's a project organization, like making a film, like finding a vaccine for coronavirus. And the fourth one is the personal organization. And I had great trouble finding an example in sports. People say track and field, but those aren't organizations. Organizations are where people cooperate. Track and field, mostly people are doing it themselves. But World Cup yachting is a perfect example because the person who owns the boat, designs the boat, skippers the boat, hires the crew, usually one person is in charge of everything. So it's a good example of a personal organization. Don't mix up a personal organization with a programmed organization, or a programmed organization with a professional organization, or a professional organization with a project. In the professional, they work alone. In the project, they work together. It's the difference between baseball and soccer.
Understandable, Professor. And I think I speak for everyone that is watching that we can wait to see that book on stores. So
the trouble is the pandemic. The pandemic is getting in the way, not because it's stopping me, but because I'm spending so much of my effort working on ideas for the pandemic that I'm on chapter 4 out of 7 chapters in that book.
Okay, we will have our eye open for that. Professor, let's talk about what are the challenge for management right now. We have seen a lot of techniques and technology applied to managing resources, and we have seen how they have advanced so much in recent years, especially those digital technologies like artificial intelligence, manufacturing in 3D, blockchain, among others. And we have seen how computers, every time they process more and more information than before. Nevertheless, and despite these advances in technology and the so-called Fourth Industrial Revolution, we have evidence and we have experienced what some people call a humanistic crisis in management, in which managers are more oriented for immediate results for the company, sacrificing some ethical, social, or environment aspects. What do you think about this statement? Are we having a humanistic crisis in management? And what kind of characteristic should a manager have to rule actual organizations?
We're having a humanistic crisis in the whole world, including management and including organizations. Sometimes when I'm cynical, which is too often, I define a tool as something we use in place of a brain. So we get these tools and we think that's going to solve the problem. And a tool that's been tested, so we don't need a brain. My telephone company uses a tool to process my bill because we don't need a brain processing my bill. The tool does it perfectly well. The danger is that we let tools get in the way of our brains where they shouldn't. Zoom, what we're doing now, some kind of Zoom process is interesting because some companies are saying, well, don't come back to work. This is great. We'll do everything by Zoom. And I think that could turn out to be a huge mistake because you can't keep the human dimension. You can't build culture on Zoom. You can't bump into somebody at the coffee machine on Zoom. Everything is pre-programmed. Everything is structured. It's much more programmed in a way. And if you're not a programmed organization, or management is never a programmed process within the organization, then you have to be careful of tools. So yes, use tools. They're great. I love Zoom. Doing things. I couldn't be up here locked up for 6 months without Zoom or something like that. I couldn't be talking to you in Colombia and saving 2 very long flights without this kind of technology. So this technology is wonderful. I walk over to my laptop and I was speaking to a friend. I said, I got to go now. I'm going to Colombia. And she said, you're going to Colombia now? I said, yeah, it's 5 minutes away. I walk up to my laptop and I'm in Colombia. So yeah, use tools, but just be careful about tools. We're not going to get over the crisis of humanistic society or humanistic management if we keep allowing our tools to push the humans out of the way. And so, a lot of what organizations do, they say, if you can't manage it, if you can't measure it, you can't manage it. That's ridiculous. Absolutely ridiculous. You can't measure culture. You can't measure the effect of management. You can't measure engagement. You can't measure all kinds of things that really matter. You can measure all kinds of things like sales and all kinds of dimensions, measure what you can. But this idea that measurement becomes a tool that's used in place of a brain is very destructive. It's we now have a measure for assessing companies called the bottom line, or it's not really the bottom line, it's share price. It's a very nice measure that's killing companies. It's killing companies because smart managers know how to manipulate the share price, by cutting long-term investment for short-term gains. And there's all kinds of ways. Everybody can manipulate every number there is. And so, we've got to be very careful about that and find a balance between being I like to say between being pat and being playful. So being pat means everything's structured and the quarterback calls the play and everybody knows what to do. Being playful is let's have some fun here. Let's try something new. Let's try something nobody's tried before. And that's what happened in IKEA with the furniture. They were playful in a sense. Oh, what a good idea. If we have to take the legs off, so do our customers. That's being playful. That's what's important in organizations. You have to be pat, otherwise we couldn't get the furniture delivered to the IKEA warehouse at a cheap price. But if you want new ideas, you got to be playful.
That's right, Professor Mintzberg. What are those characteristics or skills that a manager should have in order to rule an organization or a division, taking into account what society is about right now with all the cons and pros that we have in our countries? What are those key skills that a manager should master?
You know, in my book, Managing, I have a section on what's an effective manager, which is the same kind of question. And I show that all the short lists are inadequate because, I end up with 52 items on the list. If you list all the things that people need to be effective managers, you end up with something like 50 different items. Well, Superman couldn't do that unless you put kryptonite on the list, and then he'd be in trouble. So these lists, effective management depends on the condition you're in. If you're in dire need of a new strategy, you better have a very clever entrepreneur or leader or manager who's in touch. But if you want to keep going and keep doing what you're doing better, then maybe you want to spend more time building culture and so on. There are certain things that I think good managers always have. They're good listeners, for example. They're intelligent. They're energetic. On my list of 52, I put about 10 or 12 of them in boldface, being the most important, or being, in my view, more important. But what brings managers down is not their strengths, but their weaknesses. That they have some fault that won't be acceptable. If you have a president of the United States who's lying all the time, that's a pretty bad fault. You can't deal with that. But we should be picking people for senior positions based on their faults and not just based on their qualities, because it's the faults that will bring them down. And how do you know their faults? Well, there's only two ways to know a manager's fault. One is to work for them and the other is to marry them. And you can't ask the wife or the husband because they're biased, but you can ask the people who worked for them. If somebody is coming up for a job, ask the people they managed. Was this person effective? Did they do a good job? What are their weaknesses? Everybody has weaknesses, but will these weaknesses get in the way of doing a proper job?
That's right, Professor. Many people that are watching us right now that are connected to this conversation are professors and researchers on management, how to move forward into management science. What kind of methods should we follow, and what are the topics that we need to focus on to teach for the future managers, for our students? How to advance on that?
Yeah, I think my answer would be experiential methodology, experiential pedagogy, which means, look, I don't believe you can create a manager in a classroom. So if you take people who have never managed, you can teach them marketing, you can teach them finance, you can teach them accounting, and they'll be very good at that. You can't teach them management. You learn management on the job. What we do in our programs is we take people who are managers and we bring them into the classroom and they sit at round tables and they learn half the time from each other. They share their experience, they reflect on their experience, and they learn from each other. And that's a very, very powerful experiential pedagogy. And that's really what we need if we're going to teach management. And of course, as we discussed before, Juan, we also need to teach organization theory. That you can teach anybody. You have to understand organizations and how they work. Everybody has experience in organizations. No matter how young you are, you took swimming lessons at the Y, you're part of a football club, you went to a church, you belong to a university. You understand organizations, but you need to understand them conceptually. And so that's also important.
That's right. This question is based because here in Latin America, in Colombia, we have a bachelor program on management almost in every university. And so students that have finished high school, they get into a program in a university, and one of the most demanded programs is management. So that was the basis of this question, because those are students really young that are changing from high school to a university classroom, and they are trying to study management. And of course, professors like me are struggling to teach them management. So any advice on that, Professor?
Yeah, you can't teach them management. Teach them organizations. Teach them how organizations work. I think that's much more important, because whatever they're doing in marketing, finance, anything, they need to understand organizations. Look, if you want to find out about your own psyche, you can go into a bookstore and pick 50 books on how you work as a human being, your behavior, your functions, your cognition. If you want to find out about the economy, you can open any newspaper and read 5 articles about the economy. If you want to find out about organizations in between where we live so much of our lives, where do you go? Where do you go? Business schools, management schools should be teaching them about organizations. They need to learn about management, but unfortunately, they're only going to really learn about it properly on the job. You can give them a sense of it, but I don't think they'll understand it fully till they start being managers.
Yeah, I agree that organization is a certain point.
There are certain aspects of management, like teamwork and so on, that everybody understands. So you can teach those things, but you can't teach the practice of management to non-managers.
Thank you, Professor. And what about science? What about management science? Do you think that we are closer to have a real science of management? What do we need to move forward to achieve that?
No. We have very little science in management. Management is not a science. It is not a profession. It's a practice. It's not like medicine. It's not like engineering. It's not like those kinds of things. It's a practice. You learn it on the job, and then you go into school to share your experiences with other managers. That's the right order. Management. I use a triangle, and I say, look, there's a lot of craft in management, experience-based. Craft is based on experience, and a lot of apprenticeship, even if we don't call it that. We learn from other managers. There's a certain amount of art in management, being creative, being playful, coming up with ideas. There's some science in management, the use of measurement, analysis, technique, but not much. And so, again, balance. You need a balance between a lot of craft, a certain amount of art, and some science, but not too much. Not too much.
Thank you, Professor. Finally, I know that we are getting closer to our hour that we have agreed. And I have a couple of questions just to end our conversation. One is, what is your insight about organizational culture? Because there's always a debate where those who think that that's something that you can manage, and those who think that that's something that emerge in social interaction and that you cannot manage. So what is the real role of management when it comes to organizational culture?
I think that the founders of companies, namely entrepreneurs, create the culture, establish the culture. I think after that, what's important is what I call communityship, a healthy culture where people want to work together. And that's critically important in existing organizations. You're not so much creating the culture, you're protecting the best part of the culture, and you're enhancing it and making it stronger rather than creating it. Sometimes if it's really sick, you might have to try recreating it. But if it's got good roots, your job is to protect it and enhance it.
Thank you, Professor. Finally, this is the last question, and this is something that I've been reading on the chat from the people that is connected. So, what would it be the scenario for organization and management after the pandemic? Do you have an idea?
I'm not sure it's going to change all that much. We'll use more Zoom calls. We'll work more at home. We'll rethink things. My only hope is that it'll shock people into opening up to the messages I've been trying to convey about grounded management, about leaders who are disconnected and getting rid of those kinds of people and so on. So, my take on it is maybe these messages will be getting through more easily now. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Henry Mintzberg, for accepting this invitation. I hope this is not the last one. I hope we can see each other with our academic community once again. We are really grateful for you to have dedicated this hour with us. We are sorry for the technical inconvenience at the beginning, but I think that we have managed at the end to have this conversation.
Good. Thank you.
Thank you, Profesor Henry Mintzberg. Muchas gracias a todos ustedes que se conectaron. Pedimos disculpas por los inconvenientes técnicos al inicio de la charla. Entenderán que son temas relacionados con todo lo que es la transmisión en vivo. Al final pudimos tener una conversación muy interesante y que seguramente estará en las comunidades académicas de las escuelas de administración y de negocios de nuestra ciudad, de nuestro país. Esperamos seguir manteniendo esta conversación viva con todos ustedes, tanto con quienes conforman nuestra comunidad académica en la UPB, como aquellos colegas que hacen parte de otras universidades. Muchas gracias por sus comentarios en el chat. Agradecemos su audiencia y estén atentos para la traducción, la charla, esta conversación ya traducida al español para aquellos que están interesados en lo que aquí conversamos. Muchísimas gracias y hasta una próxima oportunidad.